Hello, everybody. Welcome to Managing Stress, an organizational and individual approach. We're here. I'm Amy J. Wilson, one of your hosts. We also have Heidi Marlinghouse today joining us. And we do have a worksheet that we're following for today. So feel free to download that and have access to it. But to get us started, we're going to start asking this question, and we're going to do a round robin here, is what brought you here?
Yeah, so I just want to we're not going to take too long, maybe a minute to just kind of settle ourselves. And if you can close your eyes, if that's comfortable for you, feel free to do that. If it's not comfortable for you to close your eyes or you're out walking your dog, you might want to just stop and find something to either look at that's not distracting, like if you're out in nature, just looking at a tree or looking at a leaf, like something that's stagnant. The reason we close our eyes is to avoid all the distractions of other things moving around us. Another option is just to look downward, and then your eyes or your vision becomes a little fuzzy and it removes all the distractions around you. And from there, we're just going to do some deep breathing. And if you feel a thought come in, you're going to notice that thought, imagine it on a Post-it note, and stick it to a helium balloon and watch it float away as you come back to your breath. Because every time we have a thought, it tends to take us away from our breath. So that's how we're going to handle the thoughts as they come in. All right, when you're ready, find your position. Close your eyes or soften your gaze and take a deep breath in and exhale. Breathing deep breaths at your own pace. And when you're ready, take another deep breath and open your eyes. And we'll continue from there. And we like to bring these strategies to you because they're something that you can use anytime. That's basically a breathing meditation practice that helps you to deal with the thoughts. But you can do that for a minute like we did, or you could do it for 20 or 50 minutes, which most people don't do. But the point is throughout the day, you could have little ones of these along the way, and that will help to regulate your nervous system. It will help you to regulate your emotions and to bring that sense of calm.
Hmm. Thank you, Heidi. I feel calm already just having that minute to arrive here. So thanks for leading us through that. So I think we also have one of our first questions that we have. Do you want to lead us through that, Heidi?
Yeah, and this is a question that's in your worksheet. I noticed Jennifer just arrived. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello.
And so I'll put the worksheet in the chat again. Um, but if you have not opened that up, this is a good opportunity for you to take a look at it. And this question is a fist of 5, which means it's just a scale rating for you to decide, do you have tools to manage stress? 1 would be, nope, I have no tools at all. And 5 would be, I could write a book about this stuff. And I'm just kind of here to check out what you're all about. So fist to 5, and you can call that out popcorn style. You can put it in the chat, or you can do both. Would love to hear where you're at with that. Jennifer says she's 4.5. Good job,
Four
Jennifer.
and a half. Look at that.
She's not an overachiever going for 5.
Overachiever. Why? I want to know about the half. Why not
This
the
is
half?
3-ish.
Okay.
I'm with Jennifer, always learning, right? Always learning.
We're always learning. Can't always be a 5 because then that's hard.
Yeah.
All right.
Amy, where are you at?
Ooh, I didn't put mine in there too. you know, I would say 3.5. Let's do, I'm gonna go with the theme. Three
Hey,
and a half. Kind of
Jen's
in the middle. Sometimes, I'm great, sometimes I'm not. But I actually like with this working with Heidi has been lovely to like regulate ourselves, like regulate myself, but also to co-regulate has been really helpful as a really great tool that we've been able to do.
Yeah, we
So
have our moments working
yeah.
together.
We
We
do.
all,
We do. But I appreciate that. Appreciate you. Thanks for that sharing that piece.
yeah, we show up as human beings, so that's important.
Hmm.
Uh, and I want to just share that I know some of you said you had other things going on, like, oh, hi Tanya, you're back from walking your dog.
Yeah.
What kind of dog do you have?
Oh, he's like 12 pounds of a Yorkie poodle.
Oh, it's so cute.
Hmm.
So Tanya's here with us now in the video, and if
Yeah.
anybody else has the opportunity to pop off screen, we do like to be interactive. I know Karen, you said you had some work stuff going on, and Jennifer, I don't know if you have stuff going on, but anyway, consider that as we go through. So part one, we're going to go over where stress comes from. If we could go to the next slide, that would be great.
Hmm.
And we want to ask you this question before we start part one. When you hear the word stress, what do you think of? And go ahead and just come off of mute and call out like what is that? What does stress look like to you? What does that feel like to you? How do you know when you're stressed?
You can also put in the chat too if you want to, right?
I don't know, tension like in the body. I know people carry it differently, but for me, it shows up generally my shoulders, in between my shoulders. And if it's really bad, I can get migraines. Uh, Feeling like you can never, no matter how much you do, you can never quite get ahead or even catch up sometimes. Those are the worst times.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank
Jennifer says there's eustress and distress, but I think most people think stress as the bad kind. You want to talk about that a little more, Jen?
Sure. Um, well, I think of like stress that kind of like it stimulates the nervous system and kind of like what was just said about, just lots of stuff and can't get ahead of it. But then there's also like the good stress that energizes and it's so stimulating you, but in a good way, like um, you know, if people like to bake and they're running around doing grocery shopping and making cookies for the holidays and like that is a lot of stuff you got to do, but it brings joy.
And even exercise is stress, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
There's good stress and bad stress, it sounds like.
And I received a message in the chat that the link wasn't opening for the worksheet. Is it opening now? Because I've adjusted some things to see if that helps. Okay, awesome. All right. So if unless anybody else wants to share about stress, what that's like for them, what they think of when they hear that word, we can move on.
Okay,
So
perfect.
here are some things that show up when we feel stress, right? Um, these are both things in our personal lives. These are things at our work. And they're generally things that, when put on us, especially all at once, we feel very overwhelmed and very stressed out. And we'll look at the next slide. And so it comes at us from all these angles, but these here are more individualized, right? Like these are the things that are happening directly to us and with us. And then when we move on from to the next slide, we'll look at where it comes from more at a workplace. So this is personal. That could be happening at home. That could be happening with family, with friends. It could also be happening at work. And then the next slide.
Mhm. Heidi, I think I'm supposed to be taking this section, by the way.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Um, so I'll just like I'll pinpoint a little bit of a couple extra things I wanted to add about this is that um, there is actually a piece about social isolation and lack of social support. This is actually something when it comes to Dr. Robert Putnam did a bunch of work and he wrote this book called Bowling Alone. And it's talking about how us as a society is growing apart from each other and becoming more socially isolated. And also, we have less friends than we used to. We used to gather. We are gathering less than we did 50 years ago. So that's something that is actually creeping into our work lives because we might have people that we can trust at the workplace, but sometimes we don't, and a lot of times we don't. So there's a lot of things that can affect us, like things like adverse childhood experiences, what are or ACEs they're called, and like when we are younger, some trauma that we may have experienced in our childhood actually do show up in the workplace and in our daily lives. So that happens very often in the work. Um, and then, but then this place is like there's also environmental causes in our workplace. So organizational culture, you'll see this place of like system power over us, or there might be an individual's power over us. One of the stories someone has shared before is like there was a bully who was a manager who was bullying somebody, and that happens often in the workplace. So how might we really like work through and manage the stress on our own, and when we can't control what somebody else's does? So there's lots of things. There's social systems, society, and we live in and will prioritize the needs of some individuals over others. Really that power indifference has been baked into our workplaces as well. And then there's also been lack of leadership and team support, going back to the idea of that individual power over us. If we don't have the support, how do we feel like we can actually get our work done? So stress is quite an insidious thing, but this is just kind of like to talk about what's in the ether when we show up in our workplaces. So when it comes to the end of this, before we go into, we're going to go into a little bit deeper into what what happens with our brains and our bodies on stress. But I just one quick conversation or reflection we wanted to add here is what is an area of your life does stress show up?
I'll share a little bit. My stressors in my life are coming from all sorts of angles. I have aging parents who are needing a lot of support right now. I have teenage kids, one still in high school, one just graduated, moving into college this year. And then I have financial stressors as well. My husband owns his own business, so his income goes up and down every year. We never know what it's going to be like. And so that's a lot of different stressors coming from different angles. I don't have too many stressors as far as my work goes today because I work for myself. But when I was in, organizations, then I found a lot more stressors through work on that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing that we haven't noticed or we haven't talked about is, one of the biggest stressors I've had is just like the roller coaster of this election that we've had so far and the back and forth. Like that's always in the back of my mind and has been very affecting me in a very deep way. So.
Okay, so part two. As Amy mentioned, we're going to be looking at how this affects us both with our brains and our bodies. So we'll move on to the next slide, which is all about our sympathetic nervous system. But you can think of it as like a gas pedal. Basically, your adrenaline kicks up, everything becomes accelerated, your heart beats faster, breathing becomes faster, although your digestion slows down, which is interesting, right? All these different things are happening in our bodies here. And that's because we have this hormone of adrenaline flooding through. And you might feel that, like, especially if you're nervous about something and you're getting really shaky, or you're feeling like you're running around, and you can just feel that kind of gas going through you, right? That gas pedal. And then the next slide is the parasympathetic nervous system. And this happens when we're in a calm state. So this has happened when we're not feeling all that stress. And it's like the brake. And Amy found this cute little image here as that old like pull emergency brake, right? Because otherwise it looked like the gas pedal. Most of our cars don't have these anymore, but I think all of us here have experienced that emergency brake, right? None of us are in our 20s. So we've all experienced the emergency brake before. And that's what we want to be happening. We want to be working through our stress so that we can get to that point where we can have it stop and we can feel the effects of that recovery, right? So you notice like all the things that were happening before, basically the opposite are happening now. So your heart's beating at a more appropriate pace, your breathing slows down, your digestion regulates, all of these things happen. All right, and we'll move to the next slide. And this is the response cycle, which Amy and I have talked about this before in other sessions. And the main thing about this is, you probably recognize this, right? There's a stressor first, and then your system gets activated, and then you handle the stress. And then it takes some time for your system to get deactivated. So you can think of that as like if a police officer was coming up behind you with their lights on, right? That's a stressor. Your adrenaline immediately kicks in. That's your response system. And let's say the police officer doesn't even pull you over. They just drive on by. The stress is handled now. It's disappeared. But it takes you a minute to have that nervous system drop down, right? It takes you a minute to stop feeling shaky or whatever it is that you're feeling. So that's number 4. And then from there, that's when the recovery and rest system is activated after you've had that chance to calm down and the cycle is complete. But a lot of us don't complete the cycle. So we'll go into the next slide. We have stressors coming at us all the time. And like Jennifer mentioned earlier, some stress is actually good stress, right? Growing and learning. If you're in a new job or you're taking a class, that's stressful, but that's good stress. You're extending your brain, you're extending your knowledge. Exercise is good stress. There's also tolerable stress, which, okay, I can handle this. This is something that I have to work through. It's not an easy thing. It's not quick, but I can work through it. So a loss of a relationship, a loss of a loved one, a loss of a pet, some other things that may be longer term, like a health issue that's not permanent, those kinds of things. That's tolerable, and you can eventually close that cycle. But then we also have toxic stress, and that's when it just keeps coming at us, right? So like Amy mentioned earlier, being in a workplace where the manager is a bully, that's a toxic stress environment because you can't close that loop, right? You never know when the next thing's going to come up from that person. But also, if you're, like I mentioned, with my personal stress, it's coming at me from all different angles. If I'm not closing that loop on each one of those, I end up being in a toxic situation as well. So it's not always that it's one situation that's creating toxic stress. Sometimes it's because we have too many coming at us and we're not dealing with them. So there are some ways that we can do that. But we'd like to know from you first, how does this cycle show up in your life? And if you want us to put it back up on the screen for you to look at the numbers 1 through 6, we'd love to hear from you. How does this cycle show up in your life? Like, are you getting to that point where you're able to close that cycle? So this next section is about completing the stress cycle. And we're going to give you some tools that we've learned about from the Nagoski sisters, who wrote a book on the stress cycle. And if we can go to the next slide, that would be great. So they're saying that some of these things that will literally help you get to that step 6 and close that cycle is taking deep breaths. And at the beginning of this workshop, we practice that. Laughing is another thing that can be done. And you could laugh on your own by watching a comedy show or something, but also when you laugh in community with other people, It really helps you to regulate your emotions. It builds connections and bonds. And there's so much about that that is really beneficial. I know if you're in a really stressed state or you're feeling depressed or something like that, it could be hard to laugh, right? Like I remember once when I was in college, feeling really stressed out and somewhat depressed, I remember asking my roommate, how do you even laugh? Right? And that was just an indication that I needed to work on that. So she and I would go to like funny movies on Fridays and things like that to help me get out a laugh. Also, having a good cry. I mean, you've heard it a bazillion times, I'm sure. Like, I felt so much better after I had a really good cry. That triggers, different hormones in our body and allows us to release that stress. And then any type of movement. This is probably your number one way to combat stress, is just to move. And that could be as simple as like dancing in the kitchen to a song that comes on the radio that you really like. Or it could be going for a walk in the city, out in nature with your dog, like whatever. Maybe just stretching, like whatever works for you for movement, that really helps us to complete this stress cycle. And we'll go to the next slide.
Mhm.
So when we reduce that stress, we looked at the parasympathetic nervous system earlier. We called that the brake, right? And what happens in our body when we're completing that stress cycle. So when you look at this here, you'll see that this is all the benefits we get from getting to that spot, right? When we're in that completed state, we're in the parasympathetic nervous system, we're able to reduce our stress, we're able to have better memory, we become more creative. So in a workplace, like you want this for your staff, right? You want them less stressed. You want them remembering things. You want them to be able to be innovative and creative. And of course, it also improves our relationships and our personal physical health. Now, there was a time in my life where I was under a lot of stress. I was one of those people who had a boss or a manager that was bullying me. And I couldn't tell you my last name. If you asked me, it was so hard for me to pull it out. I mean, I would get it, but it took so much effort to find it in my brain. And I also was teaching fitness at the time. And so I'd count to 8 a lot, and I'd find myself getting stuck counting to 8. And I was like, what is wrong with me? That was that whole spot of memory, right? My stress levels were so high that I was just having a really difficult time engaging my brain. And that shows the sympathetic nervous system, that gas pedal going off. Whereas when I'm calm, I have a better ability to do all that. Okay, we'll move on. So emotional intelligence can really help us to combat stress as well. And it's the key to personal and professional success. And emotional intelligence can be defined in a lot of different ways, but we can think of it really as having an understanding of our emotions, being able to regulate our own emotions, and also being able to have awareness around other people's emotions. Like that's the general consensus around emotional intelligence. It's sometimes thought of as not as important as like the IQ, right? The emotional quotient, or EI, sometimes people call it, sometimes they call it EQ, is equally important because we saw how it affects the body. And if the body isn't able to function properly, then your intellect isn't, your academic or your work intellect isn't necessarily going to come out as strong either. So it's really important to balance those two. Okay. Part of having emotional intelligence is understanding what we have control over. And in this chart, you'll see that there are some things very small. This is the white circle in the middle. That's our circle of control. We can control basically ourselves. We can control what we do, what we choose, what we say. We can't always control our thoughts, but we can control what impacts our thoughts. Now, outside of that, doesn't mean that we don't have any control. We can't do anything about it. There's this circle of influence. We can be influential to people. And that's where Amy and I come in with Healing for Work. We are trying to influence individuals and organizations to bring in emotional intelligence to the workplace, right? So that's one way that we give back. And I do that because I had no control over the work situation that I had where I was being bullied. So now this is a way for me to be like, okay, I can take that and I have something I can do with it. I can influence other organizations in a positive way. And then we have a bigger circle around that, which is the circle of concern. And this is where we really have no control over the outcome, right? We can be concerned for a person or a thing that's happening, but we don't have any ability to influence and we don't have any ability to control it. So a good example of that is like my mother. My mother's 81 years old. She's getting older. She probably should be using a walker now. She's needing some like a railing or a ramp to get into her house. She probably shouldn't be driving her car. I don't get to control these things for her at this point in time because she's not at that state where I have the authority to do that. But I can express my concern and I can feel concerned for her. And that's about as far as it goes. At some point, when she gets really bad and I become her executor of state and all of that, then I can do that, right? But at this point, I don't have that kind of control. And we'll go to the next slide. This is another example of emotional intelligence. People who are engaging in their emotional intelligence and have awareness around it tend to be less reactive. They tend to be more proactive. So you can see when you have a circle of concern, like the economy, the news, natural disasters, it doesn't make any sense to react to that, right? But we can be more proactive. We can affect the economy by how we shop or what we buy, where we shop, those kinds of things. We can affect natural disasters by where we live. Like for instance, where I live on the West Coast, and there's a lot of fires on the West Coast this time of year. So we can fireproof with our landscaping, have landscaping that's less likely to burn, those kinds of things. There's a lot we can do. So understanding how to be more proactive versus reactive. And next slide. And then these are some common workplace stressors that we might find as an individual. You know, different relationships with colleagues or clients that we interact with, either ourselves feeling disorganized or maybe the organization feels disorganized. Multitasking, which I know not all jobs are lend themselves to not multitasking. Like as a teacher, it was hard to not multitask. And then there could be physical discomfort too, especially if you're in a workplace where you are working with your hands or physically active a lot of the time. But even if you're sitting at a desk, that could be really uncomfortable for some people. And all of that can cause stress. Moving on to the next slide. So there are some stress management strategies we can use both for ourselves and to influence our workplace. We can ask for clear expectations from our superiors. We can create rituals to help us get ready before work and be calm. So maybe a breathing exercise or a meditative activity. We can learn some skills to avoid or reduce conflict. So maybe some conflict resolution skills. And there's so many more. So go ahead and take a look at some of those and see if there's any that really pop out for you. But what I'd also like you to know is that a lot of these little tools here and the tools that we mentioned from the Nagoski sisters, they're band-aids to a bigger problem. They will help you in like a first response or a first aid situation to get yourself to close that stress cycle. However, there's something deeper underneath with that emotional intelligence piece that needs to kick in. And maybe we need to work on it so that we can get to a place of more healing and prevent this stuff from coming back in the future. So we'd like for you to have this conversation around in your life, it could be at work, it could be at home. What are the things that you do have control over? And earlier in the session, we asked you to think about where stress shows up in your life. So think back to that. And using what you've learned now, what strategies can you use to complete that stress cycle? So all of these kind of help you to make that decision of how can you complete the stress cycle, knowing what's in your control, knowing where your stressors show up, what can you do to close that loop?
One thing I'll mention that harkens back to what I was just talking about earlier is like with the election, I cannot control the outcome of the election. I can do my best to participate and in it, but in talking to different people, doing phone banking, etc. But the thing that I know I can control, I was very affected by it and very emotional about it, is I stopped listening to news. And I used to consume lots of content before. I do live in Washington, D.C. And so like, politics is a thing here, really big thing. And so, but I'm surrounded by a bunch of people who are very democratic as well. So it's our own little bubble. So what I have had to stop doing is being like, I am choosing to not listen to this podcast, and I'm going to go listen to some soothing music, some Broadway jams, and sing at the top of my lungs. So that's what I've been doing. Yes.
Might as well be a sport, Tanya says. Yeah, that's really awesome that you brought that up, Jen, that whole concept of learning to let go of things that are out of our control. That is a deeper tool. That's more than a band-aid, right? That's more than taking a walk. That's something that allows you to retrain how you think about things that are out of your control. So when you have awareness around, oh, that's not in my control, I can let go of that, right? Doesn't mean that we're not going to try to pick things up. It's more about recognizing it and then shifting. And there's a couple of strategies or tools that I've heard of that help people to do that. One is called a God box for people who believe in God. That's what they might call it. Other people call it a higher power box or a letting go box. Like you can name it whatever you want it to be. And the idea is that it's a place for you to write on a note what's bothering you and put it in there and say to whatever spirit or universe or religious entity that you believe in, take this from me. Like this, I don't have control over it. So please take it and deal with it for me. And that's just one way to like physically get it off of you. When I was teaching and we were talking about something like this, we called it a worry box for my students. And I had this one student come to school with the cutest little monster puppets. And she sticks her hand in there and goes like this. And she put her worries in the mouth of the monster. It ate it up and then it goes down into this little pocket. It was the cutest thing. I was like, oh my gosh, every kid ought to have that so they can learn the art of letting go from an early age. But those are some tools that you can do to rewire your brain to learn to let go.
Great. I love that aspect of it. What you were sharing, Heidi, about of the little monster eating something. I'm thinking that's going to be that's going to be like a something I'm going to bring with me to be like, well, I can do it. And like, I don't know, I saw something recently, in the Muppets. I think it's Muppets or Sesame Street, but it's like the yip yip people, like yip 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 yip. Like, I'm thinking about the yip people, the yip people. So and then like eating it up and being like, um, because often worries is just something that just weighs us down and doesn't really lift us up. So that's a great way to process all of that. So well, one of the things we're thinking about is, and we've been working through is when we talk about the stress cycle actually has a really interesting experience when there's levels of stress that are around you, who are when you're in an organization, and we call it the survival cycle. So organizations play such a significant role in managing and reducing stress out there. So there's lots of different strategies, but let's look at how the stress cycle on an organizational level creates the survival cycle. So um, when someone or a group of people are in the signs of stress at the top there, people are exhausted, they're being reactive, not proactive. That leads to decreased performance. Critical thinking and efficiency is out the window. You're just putting your blinders on and doing the work, and you're not seeing the people around us. And that's kind of one of the key components to our work, is realizing that the thing that's blocking empathy and compassion in the world is often burnout and stress that we're experiencing. And then often in a very stressful work environments, another stressful event hits, and then it becomes chronic. So one thing after another that happens, and then your stress response system is activated. That sympathetic nervous system, you're like fight or flight. You get thrown into that again. And then, but then you're not actually completing the cycle because you're not in a place of rest or integration of the idea. So you start thinking, okay, I'm going to just push harder. My thoughts and reinforcement of the community around you, of the people around you being like, go hustle culture, push harder, do this work, is something that is so apparent in our society today. And then that keeps us in this perpetual survival state of fight or flight across the system. And so on top of that, we're reacting to stressors within our environment. There's two different challenges that I want to talk about. Is similar stress, is compassion fatigue. It's when someone becomes numb to the suffering of others, feels less able to display empathy towards them, or loses hope in their ability to help. And it's actually this equation of burnout plus secondary trauma, which is experiencing the trauma that somebody else is experiencing. You're going to see this in helping professions, and like nurses, healthcare professionals, teachers. There's a lot of trauma in our schools. So that creates this deeper sense of burnout and emotional exhaustion. And then empathic distress is actually has to do with our physiology. So how we're wired as humans. So we all pick up signals from each other's nervous systems. Like this is how our nervous systems are created. And that's called empathic resonance. And sometimes we pick up distress signals from other people's nervous systems. So think of this as a big network of nervous systems in our workplaces. This is something that you can actually feel, and research has shown this, that you can feel even in a Zoom chat, right? You don't have to be physically in the same space. You feel this and you notice their emotions. So this is called empathic distress. You even what happens is that when you start feeling other people's nervous systems and your burnout, you're distressed, then that means you're even more distressed because you're picking it up from other people. And what has happened, especially in the pandemic, our need for safety, belonging, and dignity have really been threatened, which has resulted in our own traumas that we're processing. I do know that there's a mental health crisis happening in a lot of ways. So we're like, these are a lot of the causes that are showing up and creating us to be in a survival state. But not all is lost. So according to Pew Research Center, a little more than half of adults find that their job is stressful. 29% are saying that my job is stressful most of the time. And 19% of people say they're stressed. I feel that my job is overwhelming. So more than half the people are just being like, okay, stressful, and a lot of the time even, and almost 20% is very overwhelmed by it. So let's come back to this idea of the circle of concern. We're going to focus on this section on the things you can influence, which is that middle circle. we might not have control of the outcome in these things, but we can influence it with what we can control. And there's a saying in one of my support groups that I'm in that says that just by you showing up differently in a system, acting in a different way, thinking in a different way, that is actually, you're actually changing the people around you as well. It has this like network effect. If I talked about empathic resonance earlier, you actually, or empathic distress, you can actually, if you are one of the nodes in that network, you can actually change the culture for better by the people who are surrounding you. So there's a lot of hope in that. So to help us understand what's in the realm of possible, when it comes to that circle of influence, there's a few things I call dyads that I'd like to share. Is like there's things that we can definitely do, and that's the circle of control. But then there's things that our organizational leaders can do, and that is the people who are many of our organizations are hierarchical, not necessarily flat. And so our leaders have a lot of responsibilities, right, to take care of the people that are around them. And so the other dyad that I wanted to mention is to protect, and at the end of the day, this is really trying to protect ourselves from harm that stress can bring on. So there's also tangible things that, our organizations can do, our leaders can do, that includes putting a program together, like bringing in us from Healing for Work into your organization to help have dialogue and conversations, resolve conflict, these kinds of things. And there's going to be a document, there could be a product that you bring in to help connect to each other. And then there's intangible things, which is what is really the culture of the organization. And it's like the personality of the organization. And each team has its own personality. And there's a feeling or a sense that you can have by the way you behave. And that's where behaviors really come in. It's not something you can like write down, but it's something you feel. So this is a point of reflection for us as we are thinking about, we've gone through this whole journey of like the stress cycle, what stressors exist in our own lives. We just talked a little bit about what we can do as organizations, and think about how can we influence other people. In the next slide, I will talk a little bit about some strategies for you to do that. But I just wanted us to, before we do this, to kind of have a bit of a reflection and conversation right now on a time when you worked through a stressful situation in your workplace. It could be now or something that it's probably better to do something that's happened in the past when it was very stressful. And you can reflect for a minute or two on like what happened, how you felt, and any details you care to share here. And then I want you to ask yourself, how did you try to manage your stress in that scenario? How did it go? And then what could you have done differently? Based on what you know now, from some of the stuff you learned in the session today. To kind of bring this full circle, workplace stress is this pervasive issue that affects employees across many industries, no matter where you are. There's lots of causes that happen in this. So on the left-hand side are just like things like heavy workloads and long hours, a work-life imbalance, things like you don't have control and autonomy in your work. Somebody is really controlling what you do and how you do it. Poor communication and support from your leadership on top of that. So inadequate communication and from your management and lack of support can leave people feeling isolated or undervalued. And you're also struggling to balance your professional responsibilities with your personal life, and that kind of has that like chronic stress situation. So if you're working long hours, then that puts stress on your personal life and your relationships and your relationship to self. And then also with economics instability and organizational changes, there's a lot of uncertainty now, especially now around job security. Um, so, and if they're not having, if people don't have the right resources and tools, and I think about Tanya, like, is like you weren't resourced. It doesn't sound like you were resourced effectively. There might have been poor communication and support, maybe some conflict, maybe that you needed some other support. There's some ways that could have been worked into it. So some strategies that we're talking about, we can say is like, when you say there's the causes of stress in the workplace, there's lots of different ways to do that. One way to do that is the opposite of it, is like, how do I create more harmony in my life? And there are strategies like, setting better boundaries, right? And then like, is one place that you can have that. And just being like, talking with your manager about, making sure you work from home a few days a week. And from a leadership perspective, and all of these things, one thing to mention is that these are things that leadership can do to support you. But what we try to talk about is, how can I influence people around me, even my own leadership, to speak up about how do you empower your employees? How can we have better communication? You can be kind of a beacon of hope for communication. You can communicate transparently. You can also influence up and into these positions, and then help advocate for your needs when it comes to getting the resources that you need. And this is stuff that like seems pretty basic, but I think really has a big effect. And I don't think these are the first things that people come to, is being like, it's good to call them out and say there are some adequate resources. And that story that you just shared, Tanya, could have turned out completely differently had there been some interventions that happened, and some restructuring or whatever was needed to really assess what's happening and maybe focus on the team dynamics you were even identifying, right? In there. And then one thing that we always stress is provide mental health support in various ways in the workplace. So being able to have people that you can talk to, trusted people that you can chat with about what's happening, and you can recognize and reward efforts that people are doing, because especially people in leadership roles who are carrying so much, has crap thrown up from the top and like stuff from the bottom that are like squeezed from both sides. I saw that a lot in my workplaces. So recognize and reward the efforts, not just the leaders, but even the people who are on your team. So there's a couple strategies. And now that we only have a few minutes left here. In the worksheet, we have a section here, a blank canvas for you to start thinking about. On one side of the spectrum, what are the causes of the stress in your past workplaces? So when I'm thinking about you, Tanya, is being like, what happened before? And how could I have turned the table or changed things around, to reframe how this whole scenario could turn out, and how could I influence myself? And sometimes the answer is like, maybe the organization just is not able to evolve, and then that's when that's not the right place for you. So just some things to think about.
So we have these on pages 4 and 5 of the worksheet.
Mhm.
On page 4 is the examples that were listed on the last slide. And then page 5 is this blank chart for you to complete for yourself. This can be something that, like Amy said, you can do from a past stressor and how you worked it out, but you can also use this as a planning sheet. If you're dealing with something right now and you're trying to figure out what strategy to use, you can go back and think about some of the things we've talked about, or do more research, or even have a conversation with us after the session, and we can help you build this chart together, so that you can work on that stressor. I also wanted to say that Amy had mentioned in the last slide that we always mentioned to bring in or to provide mental health resources for their organizations. And that is one of the things that we do. We create these group conversations where people can come together and share their thoughts to get it out, but also to share resources and strategies, very similar to what we're doing today. Today, we've provided you with some education on the topic. We've also provided opportunities for you to share about what's happening in your own life and to reflect on how you might be able to work on some of those stressors, but also to hear from others on how they're doing it. Because sometimes listening to somebody else's story will trigger us to like, oh, hey, I could try this. And maybe what you're thinking isn't exactly what they said, but it's inspired you to think of something that will work for you or that you could try different. So we do that. We bring that into organizations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Heidi, and thanks for that plug for us. I think we're going to be closing it out. We have Fist of Five. Heidi, you want to lead this quick check-in?
We asked you this very same question at the beginning. Do you have tools to manage your stress? And since we've been talking about different strategies today, and also you've heard from a variety of people, wondering if your number has changed from the beginning. So would love to hear from you in the chats or popcorn or both. Where are you now? I remember there were lots of threes. There was a 4.5. I think there was a 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
There was a 4 before. Where are we now?
Mm-hmm. Words. Okay, okay. All right. You went up a little bit, Tanya, 3-ish to 4.
Jennifer, are you still 4.5 or are you up to a 5 now? Or 4 and 3/4?
Oh, I'm perfect now.
5/8.
You
5/8.
completed me.
You completed me. Um,
Nice.
well, the good thing is that, there's pathways for us to manage stress. We don't have to do it alone. And I think that's the important thing, is that we can build relationships and workplaces where we can actually work on these challenges together, and resolve any conflicts we might have. So to close out, I just wanted to mention a couple things about healing for work and the work that we do. Like it was just Heidi and I were just mentioning, we go into workplaces, we train leaders in emotional intelligence to improve workplace well-being and foster thriving organizations. And at the end of the day, we really want to create organizations that are a sanctuary for well-being, where it's prioritizing health, um, and reduction of workplace stress, and also increase productivity and happiness at the end of the day. This is lofty goals that we have, but I think we can help reach that in a bigger way. There's multiple ways we do this. This is one of our workshops. We have many other ones that we talk about when it comes to social and emotional learning, knowing about yourself, but also building social awareness. We lead discussion groups that are kind of like a support group, or just a talk through, right, to build connection with folks. And then we also have group coaching programs. We have individual coaching, and we also have group coaching as well. And we also, if you are interested in letting us know what are some things that are coming up for you, we actually do have a mid-year survey that's still live that we would love to. And Heidi, if you can drop that in the chat, the survey, if there's something in particular you want us to follow up on, let us know, or to go deeper into. And here's our contact information. This is our general contact info, our website, and our social media handles on Instagram and LinkedIn. So if you want to stay in touch with us, if there's something of interest to you, you were sparked by something here, reach out to us and we'll get back to you.